All right. Welcome everyone. We've just found out that Hangouts on Air, the mechanism we use to record these and to bring these little episodes to you, is going to be deprecated on August 1st, which is like 2 weeks from now. So we'll have to figure something else out. But in the meantime, here is another putting process behind the scenes episode with myself, Ilya, with Amber Thomas, who you all know, and with Jess Peter.
Hey, I'm a guest contributor, Jess Peter. I did the book covers project that was posted recently, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
And I'm actually realizing this now. I think, Jess, you are a fellow Canadian. Am I right?
I am Canadian, yes.
Okay, we are outnumbering the Americans 2-1.
I thought that was the plan. Like, I'm just forgetting the emails we exchanged earlier. But yeah, so go Canada, go. I don't know, sports teams. The Raptors are still the Golden Boys at this point, right? We're still excited about the Raptors.
So.
Okay,
yeah,
go Raptors.
Yeah, I think so. This is a decidedly non kind of sports heavy section of the pudding. Amber's worked on a basketball story, but I'm pretty much non-sports exclusive, as it were. But if Russell were here,
the time I worked on that basketball story was in close collaboration with Russell, who knows things about basketball, because I do not.
Okay, so. That's good. I'm in good company then. It's like that kind of vague countrywide support of things, like knowing kind of the memes, like, oh, Drake is doing something with basketball. Like that's about the extent that I follow the sports generally. So yeah, I'm glad that I'm not on a sports centric episode, because I would have no idea how to. Yeah. Just books, cool kid books and whatnot. Anyway, please.
No, it's perfect. We're bringing you a lot of bookish content today. Amber has a story that she worked on with Russell about the Hipster reading list for 2019. Jess has a story about top-selling book covers. And I have a story that is somewhat bookish.
Just nerdy or what?
Yeah, more so just nerdy. Research related about the myth of the link between vaccines and autism. So I can kind of kick things off and start taking folks through that. Let me. I'm just trying to share my screen, but Hangouts on Air is making it somewhat difficult.
No.
I think I can.
It.
Yeah, that sucks. I'm really frustrated. Okay, wait. I think I've got it. New tab. Yes. Okay. Fantastic. All right. So, let's jump into things. This is the second part of a series, I guess, that I'd started called Science Etc., where I just got to tackle scientific topics in a little bit of a smaller dose than many of our regular pieces would be. I tried to unite these under some sort of framework, but they just ended up having science in common. So the first, I guess, episode, or the first project in the series, had to do with reproducibility in science, and the second one pertained to vaccines. And I started thinking about this because I live in New York, and in Brooklyn recently there was this outbreak of measles, and I was very upset because, like, why did we not vaccinate children and prevent measles from breaking out? And so I decided to look at the media coverage surrounding this link and to examine the science that's been published surrounding this idea. And I used data from the New York Times, and I examined articles that mentioned vaccines and autism um, together to find out how this myth had spread. So, um, although there was maybe an article or two early on that kind of mentioned vaccines and autism, really things kicked off in 1998 with this researcher Andrew Wakefield, who essentially single-handedly propagated this idea, and he published an article in this journal called The Lancet, which is a very well-respected medical journal, and shortly thereafter, people started to try to replicate his research, and no one was really able to. But very slowly, people started to believe the fact that there may be some link or some hint of a link. So politicians started to get involved and essentially traced the evolution of this belief in popular culture and finished the project at this somewhat unpleasant point this spring where a measles outbreak hit Brooklyn. Um, so I actually envisioned this to be a pretty short project, but it ended up taking a surprisingly long time uh, because I was, and this I guess kind of like gets into the one hard thing on my end. Like this is a pretty it's a pretty weighty topic, and I felt a lot of responsibility to readers to provide like a very accurate look at the science. So I started off just kind of putting this New York Times research together, and then I was like, no, look, this isn't good enough. I now have to essentially provide a scientific literature review and include like the best science on the topic to potentially change people's minds if someone is looking at this as a source of information about whether or not they should vaccinate their kids. And I ended up speaking to some researchers who have worked on these literature reviews and who have like written the book is basically on the topic of like vaccines and autism and where this theme came from. It's a researcher named Peter Hotez from I think he's the dean of the School of Tropical Medicine down in Baylor. Um, it's I don't think I've ever really dealt with any uh, issues that could have impacted public health, and it was really like anxiety inducing publishing something like this because I was like, well, if I get this wrong, maybe someone's not going to vaccinate their kids, or like maybe the anti-vaxxers will see it and be like, oh, he got that wrong. Like this clearly doesn't mean anything. Um, although I did see that someone had posted this on some like anti-vax social media account, and they were like, oh yeah, look, big pharma is like sponsoring anti like pro-vaccination content, but they still posted a link. So I don't know why they shared it if they thought that like.
I mean, that works though. I mean, whatever way to get it out into those communities, right?
Totally, yeah. I mean, if they're like first posting the link and then they're like, oh, this is bad, I'm fine. Like it's still people reading it and like still
Big
people.
pharma money still goes through. No, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I shouldn't make those jokes. But did you and you guys at the office, did you get any negative feedback from people from those communities, like directly?
So I was pretty fortunate. I don't know if you've had this with other projects that you worked on. I know Amber has, but I have had pretty positive reactions in general to a lot of the things that I've covered in this series and just more broadly even. So I'm pretty lucky, I think, in that sense. And I'm also super I'm just like, well, it's the internet. Like there are always going to be people that hate your stuff, like no matter how like proud of it you are. So my assumption is like if I feel pretty good about something, and then someone hates it, like I I just dismiss their criticism straight off the bat and like feel superior, and then generally generally I'm just like kind of a dismissive jerk about it. That said, like if it's genuine criticism, I'm totally happy to field it and like to think about it if I'm wrong. But if someone's like, "Oh, this is dumb," or like, "This
Or like
is
big pharma sponsoring this content. Yeah, that's
right,"
a bit of an eye roll, I think. Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's weird too because like I've been thinking a lot about conspiracies in the past year or two, and just because I mean y'all probably heard about the flat earthers that are kind of emerging, and there was someone that like wanted to be fired out of like a cannon or something to prove the fact that the Earth was flat, and he was, yeah. I see Amber shaking her head, like not excited about the prospect. It's just a lot of really dumb shit that's coming out, and I'm like shocked at the fact that it's the 21st century. We're like a reasonably educated society, and yet somehow we're still having these dumb discussions. And like you have to wonder, I don't know how long ago did people think the Earth was flat? Like, is that something that was ever a real belief? Like, I know there was the idea of the firmament, like that big, like the sky is supposed to be like
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
painted on or so, or not painted on, but like I don't know.
Like
Maybe
that
Amber
makes
knows.
sense from like super old school. Like that's probably what I would have thought if someone hadn't explained to me. Like I was like that I can get on not can get on board with, but I can understand where you're coming from with that one.
Yeah,
But yeah.
the Earth being flat though, like maybe I don't know to what extent that was like a scientifically accepted and like thoroughly established belief. But here we are talking about like anti-vax shit and flat eartherism. So it's a little bit um it's kind of cynicism inducing, unfortunately. Uh
Are you
but
feeling
we
better
are
about it now that you got to write a story about it? Does that help at all?
I mean honestly I no, because well, like I feel good about it because I'm like, look, here's what the evidence says, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's it's somewhat disheartening to see the fervor of the people that are opposed to vaccinations, and like I get it's a very difficult thing for some parents to like have an encounter with, um, but if like the world says that like this is what the science is, why how I just don't understand the objections that you can bring up in the face of that. I don't know. So anyway, vaccines and autism. Here we are. Um, so let's hand it off to Jess next.
All right. That was awesome. It was so good to hear a bit more about that piece. Like I've seen it shared a bit before I like was seriously looking at the pudding, getting this piece prepped for publish. So awesome. Yeah, so I wrote a piece called 5,000. It doesn't have a catchy name, so I might even butcher it. So 5,000 top selling book covers visualized by an algorithm. Again, not a good title maker. I'm just gonna slip into screen share here and talk a bit through this project. So application mode. Ooh, maybe I should just do my entire screen. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Are you guys seeing everything okay? Got the regular.
We got you.
Okay, awesome. So this is the piece here up on the Pudding website. As I said, this is the first thing I've done, not just for the Pudding, but kind of in this data journalism area. Previously, I've kind of worked in like data visualization, but in kind of journalism adjacent things, doing lots of dashboard type products. So this was a really exciting thing to do, something that was kind of self-initiated and actually about a topic in a way that I'm not to hate on dashboard products. So yeah, I'll just kind of walk through quickly. So here we are when we kind of first see the page. So what this is basically every book that's been on the New York Times bestsellers list or their also selling list for the last like 11 years. So since they had their API available. And yeah, like it's honestly, on the one hand, it feels like this kind of like gigantic image thing. But on the other hand, like for 11 years, like I remember I saw someone who had retweeted this and said that this was from like just the last year, because you'd think that there'd be more best-selling books in a year. But at any rate, what this is it's using, I'm designer, not a data scientist, but a T-SNE algorithm to kind of cluster the book covers into visually similar things. And then we use another library called Raster Fairy to kind of put in this nice grid format so that you can see everything without things kind of blocking each other. And what you get from this is kind of these nice, sorry to use the word again, clusters that kind of emerge, these visual clusters. So for example, we can kind of look around here and we can see all these like white covers with big text, like mostly look like serious topics. And then say we want to zoom like over here, a lot of super nice looking, mostly white ladies, or like some really high action thrillers with huge author names over in this corner. So not only is this like a pretty neat way to kind of look at like all these book best-selling book covers, rather than just kind of like I've seen some articles that try to identify like book cover trends and stuff, and so they take like a few things and show like a few books that that resonate with that trend. Like for example, like floral imagery is super big right now, but with this we can kind of see everything, and we can explore in this kind of panny, zoomy way. So this really is, yeah, I've used the word a couple times, like an exploratory piece. So you can just kind of pick and choose different areas and kind of try to see for yourself, like what they seem to represent. Like, as I said, like looking here, we can see that these mostly seem to be like nonfiction kind of things, but we can further filter it with some of these filters. So for example, yeah, let's just see the nonfiction books. And what we can see from that is that indeed things do kind of end up clustering into these kind of common areas. So like the biographies that we were looking at before, or like these, yeah, very like, it's kind of funny because it's like, these are serious books, so they have to look serious, like not too much imagery on the cover. And then just kind of the rest of the project was just kind of figuring out, or some of the other elements of the project was kind of figuring out what else is interesting, what else kind of is present on book covers that people might be interested in kind of exploring and filtering by. So what you can do is you can go through by genre as well, and also motifs, which are, you know, extracted labels using the Google Vision API. I know I have the tendency to ramble a little bit, so I'm gonna pause a bit in case you guys have any things to weigh in on at this point.
I'm kind of wondering what your favorite cluster is that's emerged out of those, because like the serious books I noticed, but then as you were filtering, I also saw that sci-fi had like a little bit of a gathering in the bottom, actually the middle left of
Yeah.
the screen.
If you do like science fiction and fantasy, like like you do get like, yeah, some of these kind of areas where it is like, oh yes, ravens and swords and Star Wars type imagery, or you get some nice, like really heroic and alien like figures if you go around. Personally, my favorites have got to be like, sorry, the romance and erotica ones. Actually, more accurately, like Sky, and I think we included Ocean, because there are just a stupid number of books with like ocean motif. Not a stupid number of books, like the imagery works, they use it for a reason, but like oceans and like women looking off into the distance in oceans and stuff like that. And it's just like, as someone who, yeah, sorry, these are just absolutely fantastic.
The Daniel Steele ones.
Oh yeah, the Daniel Steele ones. Like Daniel Steele, like I was looking at the numbers and stuff, like, yeah, she is the absolute queen of best-selling book covers, and yeah, everything she does here is absolutely fantastic. Like, not that I've ever read a Daniel Steele book in my life, but I respect her game entirely. So yeah, this is kind of like what it came out with, and it is very much just something that is fun to kind of browse through, something that you can kind of start to have like your own hypotheses about, just because of the way that it's laid out and kind of the way that I've tried to categorize it and make things filterable. But yeah, no, this is here. 11 years of top-selling book covers arranged by visual similarity. That is what it is. Whoa, sorry.
I kind of have to ask. Well, I mean, I don't have to, but the through line for all of these is what has been the most challenging thing about this project, and it sounds like there's a lot for you to pick from, just because your background wasn't necessarily in data science. But was it that, or was it something design related, or what proved to be most difficult here?
I think that like my background and kind of my own like biases and kind of limitations to a certain extent would probably be like the biggest things that were challenging to me, because I worked with two of your editors. I worked with Matt Daniels and Caitlin Ralph, and they were super great about kind of getting me away from some of the thought patterns and assumptions that I was making that probably weren't too productive. So when I was first kind of pitching this piece, I've got a couple of tabs open that I'll just kind of walk through quickly. Like this all kind of goes back to this like super old piece I did as like a just a quick, yes, I know how to program project back during my bachelor's, where I was looking at a super small list of best-selling books with just kind of these little circles and stuff that allow different kinds of like similar like grouping and sorting by different metrics, all related again to like book cover things. Like there's a way in this that you can like have it showed as a histogram or something of book cover images and stuff. And so this was like my starting point. Like I wanted to kind of redo this as a much better piece. But when I went to Matt, like it wasn't exactly, I wasn't 1000% sure what the final piece would be. And for like a long time in my initial pitches and stuff, I was thinking in terms of things that are a lot more conventional data journalism type things. And I think that, again, part of like the job that I was doing, where it's always kind of based on like making like everything is like information retrieval time. Like you need to be able to understand a few core facts as quickly as possible. So it was like, I was kind of thinking in those ways, like we've got to like figure out which bar charts of which data is the most important thing to like tell a story. And I spent a lot of time just like filtering like data through like Vega Light and stuff and looking for correlations that way until, yeah, like eventually some of the feedback that from Matt, especially about just making sure that it was very visual, and that the book covers themselves, since it is about, you know, graphics a lot, are like the star of the piece, for lack of a better way to put it. So yeah, definitely getting past those kind of personal conceptions was like my main challenge. And I think even till the end of this project, I was probably not quite fighting. I'm going to pretend that I take criticism very, very well, but certainly being like, are you sure we can't just have like one more chart in here? I think this would like really make it work a lot better. But no, like taking that criticism, letting these visuals kind of largely speak for themselves, and keeping the interface fairly minimal. Yeah, I think that ended up working fairly well. And I think that, you know, you were saying earlier, like also like, what did you learn from it? And I think that that was, you know, super valuable, like kind of not, things don't always have to be like as straightforward message or teaching. Like things that are exploratory like this are also super, super valid. And I'm the one who made it, so it's kind of sounds a little bit egotistical, but you know what, I'll stand by that statement.
As you should.
Whoops, sorry, I will not make you look into that mirror right now. But yeah, no, I'm happy to discuss any other pieces of this as well.
This is great. No, it's, I mean, I think that's perfect. I I think for, I mean, maybe the past year or two, but I feel like we've been trying to move towards tackling questions in more experimental visual ways. And Amber, I know you've worked on like a bunch of projects that weren't at all like straightforward, kind of classic like bar chart, scatter plot, like you know.
Yep. Yeah, it's fun to kind of see like how else you can show data. So I think this is a fantastic example of like a data-driven story that doesn't, it may not look how you would expect like a data visual story to look, but it's definitely data-driven and it's fantastic. It's very visual and engaging, and yeah, no, I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, and at the very least, like there are so many data points that just didn't make it into there because they were just kind of like too much. So now they just like, they can have a second life. Like maybe one day they'll become, I'll figure out how they fit into that big old jigsaw. But yeah, just like editing and being totally on board with the exploratory factor. Yeah, that was solidly important.
Awesome. Cool. Well, should we move on to our final book-related project of the session?
Sure. So before I share screen, I think I'm going to give a little bit of the background of how this story came about, because I think that actually is kind of entertaining. So this story was originally Russell's idea, and he is one of the authors on this piece too. He just isn't in this video call right now. But basically, he came to the team and was like, I've been reading this book called The Library Book, and it's about a library fire, I believe. And he was really interested in this idea that like knowledge was lost. And so he started thinking a lot about libraries and the books that are in libraries. And I had just finished a project and very much like books and was like, can I help with this? And so Russell and I started working together and trying to figure out how to quantify the idea of knowledge in libraries, and if knowledge is lost or what exists. And we had all of these kind of like vague ideas. And actually, I will share my screen now to show you something. So when we started looking for data sources, we stumbled upon data from the Seattle Public Library. Oops, give me just a second. Oh no, hold on. One of these days I'll get the screen share thing smoothly down, but okay. Can you all see this?
Yep.
Okay. So basically, the Seattle Public Library has released a ton of data, including the checkouts of all, oh, this is gonna be really slow because I'm video sharing. The checkouts of all of their physical items that they have in stock going back to 2005. And so this was I don't even remember, yeah, 100 million rows of data just for the checkouts. And again, this is just physical items, so like actual books, not ebooks, and not like streaming video, things like that. Then they also have like their inventory, which doesn't go back as far, which we can get into kind of what happened with that in a bit. But anyways, so we found all of this data, and we found that the Seattle Public Library was like the only library in the country to have openly available data that was this comprehensive, which is kind of cool for me because I live like, I don't know, like a 15-minute walk from the Seattle Public Library. So I like walked down there one day and started asking people who worked there if they had like interesting questions they wanted to know about people's checkout behavior and things. And, you know, they kind of were just excited people were using the data. They didn't really have a lot of like strong ideas. So Russell and I dove in, and we actually, because this data set was so big, we decided we wanted to dually analyze it. So I was analyzing it in R, and Russell was analyzing it in Node, JavaScript. And our original plan, which may or may not still happen in the future, was to write a blog post about analyzing really large data in both of these two programming languages. So the data file for checkouts ended up being something like 20 gigabytes. So it was very large, and my poor little laptop struggled to deal with it. But we ended up getting it to work, and we explored a lot of stuff. Like, I don't even think it's worth like scrolling through all of this. Basically, most of the stuff we ended up exploring didn't make it into the piece that we have created so far. We may come back to this. But basically, we started looking at whether like a certain percentage of books were responsible for most of the checkouts. We wanted to know if kids' books had different checkout behaviors than adult books. And we tried taking a bunch of different routes, and we realized we were actually missing some data. So we reached out to some folks at the library who were fantastic and are going to be updating the data. And while we were waiting on that, we actually decided or started thinking about putting this project down until we got a data update, because we realized the only thing that we could say with certainty was we could talk about the books that seemed to be in the inventory but did not exist in our checkout records, which means that the book existed in the library, but nobody had checked it out. And so we were like, okay, that's like the only thing we feel comfortable saying with the data we currently have while we're waiting for the updated data. Is that interesting? And we were like, well, that's kind of the things that people aren't reading. And so we started joking with this idea of like, what if we frame it as a hipster summer reading list? Basically this idea of, oh, why can't I? Oops, hold on a second, I lost you. There we go. This idea of like, you know, hipsters have this, the sort of joke or thing is that they like stuff that isn't cool. And these are books that people haven't touched in probably like at least a decade. And so we started mocking up this idea of like, okay, what if we just have this reading list? And so we started looking actually at a bunch of other reading lists. So this is Figma. It's just where we put like our design inspiration. And most of the time, other reading lists will have book covers a lot like Jess's project, or be like an actual list. So that was our original plan for this. And we brought it to the team. And I believe it was Jan actually that was like, oh, you should line them up like on a shelf and look at the bindings. And we were like, oh, okay, we love that. What if instead we just make like a very big stack of books? And so we started playing with this idea of like a stack of books and then like letting you filter through the stacks. And so that's kind of where we ended up. So we have this project.
Can I just say Sea of Lentils is a really good title
Oh my
for
God,
a book?
I know. There's some fantastic titles. There's one book called Murder is Insane that I just think is hilarious. And like, I mean, it is. That's an accurate title. There's
like
so
Murder
many,
is so whack.
yeah, like right, exactly. There's some really good ones in here. So yeah, so we ended up making this thing where we just have this like stack of books, and you can see the whole stack here, and you can click if you wanted to jump to a certain section, and you can rearrange them based on vintages, you know, when they were published or based on how obscure they are. And so this is what we ended up doing. And all of the books, these are like generated in the browser. The colors are based on the year they were published, and the little icons and little other accents and stuff, and the fonts change. Like if I refresh this page, all of these books will actually, the font and styling of them will look different because we just decided to let the computer decide what these book bindings should look like. And then when we were working on this, we decided that, you know, having a tooltip, some sort of information about the book would be really good. And so we just had like a pretty standard tooltip at first. And then I think it was Matt was like, I want to see what this book would look like if I were actually reading it. Like make this look like an Instagram image of my desk with the book on it or something to that effect. And so we started playing with tooltips that looked like this, where we superimposed the cover if we could find it, and some information from Goodreads, again, if it existed, and link you to the World Cat Library to help you find this book at your nearest library if you want to read it.
I just have to say, like, that's one of my favorite parts of this piece. Like that illustration of the desk, of like the desk with a succulent and the coffee
Yeah,
cup.
I know.
It's like hipster as shit, and I can absolutely like relate to the appeal of that desktop.
Perfect. Yeah, I know. It really ended up working out very well. I think as soon as Matt mentioned it, Russell and I were like in the middle of a conversation still, and we're like texting each other like, oh my God, wait, I think like this. And like you just get that like spark of inspiration and just like run with it. And I think it really worked out well. So we're, I think, pretty excited about the way it turned out. And so the whole hipster angle is, of course, like mostly meant to be a joke. It's just a kind of funny way to display this data of books that, you know, haven't gotten love.
Is so for some of the filters that you've got on there, like binge mode, and like back pocket fit, how are those calculated?
So those two were both based on how many pages were in the books, and that was assuming we could figure out how many pages were in each of these books. So yeah, the World Cat Library also, for most of these books, gave like a page count. And so binge mode were books over 400 pages long, back pocket fits were books under 200 pages long, so like shorter books. You know, peak hipster were books over 100 years old with no Goodreads reviews. So like, you know, we're kind of, again, adding these sort of like funny tongue-in-cheek filters and ways to explore this data that otherwise may not have been as fun to play with. I think just framing it as like, these are the books nobody reads would be like, okay. But I think framing it this way has been kind of like a fun way to explore the data and put an entertaining lens on it.
So it's interesting. I've noticed that like a lot of the times we will have an idea, but figuring out the best way to present it, or like figuring out the verbal descriptor for that idea that communicates why it's actually really cool to people is like half the battle of framing something.
Yeah, totally. I'm going to stop sharing, but yes, completely agree. And even with this story, like we were pretty excited and like cracking up when we decided that like the hipster angle might be an interesting way to describe this one. But we've gotten feedback from readers that are like, ignore the stupid premise of this article or whatever. And we're like, whatever. That was like funny. We weren't being serious. Like it was meant to be silly and over the top. Like instead of like by Russell and Amber, we have like artisanally crafted by Russell and Amber. Like we leaned into it to be silly and you know. And so I think we're still, at least I'm still into the framing we ended up with. I think it was good. But I mean, yeah, people are always going to have thoughts. Like you were saying earlier, it's the internet.
You know, like who the people who are being offended are, right? Though they're absolutely the most hipsterish people there.
Sure. And that's what we talked about. We were like, maybe it's just the word hipster like has a weird like
they see themselves in it, and they're like,
yeah, and they're like, I don't like that.
It looks exactly like my desktop. Okay, the one thing, like the question that I have is, okay, this hasn't been out for like a super, super long time, but have you revisited the data at all to see like, would all these books now be off the Hipster summer reading list because they've all been checked out now?
We haven't checked. That would be fantastic, though. We actually, at one point when we were still working on this, we were like, each of us should get one of these books and read it. And I think we just like kind of ran out of time and didn't actually get around to reading them. I still have plans to go down to the library and make like an Instagram story of me finding some of these books and seeing, like, looking at the little card to see the last time they were actually checked out. Someday, follow us on Instagram. We'll I'll do that
yes,
someday.
such a good plug.
Side note. But yeah. So I don't know. We do still have plans to revisit the data because we were originally planning on writing different stories, and this just kind of became like a quick, funny way to tell a story with the data we had and felt comfortable talking about. So theoretically, once we get all the rest of the data we're waiting for, we will write more stuff about books.
Yes.
Amber, as far as like, I think people will know the answer based on your description, but just so that we're taking our box or the box or dotting the I's or crossing the T's or whatever, what was the most challenging thing about this project?
The data. So mostly because the data was really big. And I'm sure if anybody's listening to this and you work at somewhere that works with terabytes of data, you're going to be like, that was nothing. But I normally work with like much smaller data sets. So this was, it was a challenge, but in a good way. There was an issue at first. So the way you can download the Seattle library's data, there is a button that just says like, download the data set. And so we did that. And it came up as like 9 gigabytes. And we were like, wow, smaller than expected, but fine. And I tried reading it into R, and it kept failing at like 50 million lines in. And I was like, okay, so there's clearly an issue. 50 million lines into this data set. I don't know what the issue is. And I obviously can't open this file to like manually look, which is what I would normally do, is just check if there's like a weird character or something. And so I spent forever doing it. Russell was also running into the same issue, though he didn't realize it at first because he wasn't getting an error through Node. It was just like importing everything. But what ended up happening was that the server hung when it was downloading, and it just stopped downloading and printed an error at the bottom of the spreadsheet. And it just finished and made it look like it was done. And so eventually I was like loading, just that last imported line into R. So R was actually doing everything exactly as it was supposed to. I just couldn't figure out what the issue was. So we eventually ended up using like an API to download the data, and I only imported like the columns I needed to keep everything like condensed enough. And I would like do a specific analysis or filtering, write it out to file, remove it from my like working environment, which is probably not the most efficient way to have done all of this, but it worked fine, and I got it all done in R, and that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good lesson for people that are approaching large data sets. I mean, maybe not terabytes, but certainly like hundreds of megs or several gigabytes of data. That like managing memory and variables gets like really important really quickly, especially if you're working on a desktop. Like if you've spun up an instance in the cloud and you don't care about, I don't know, if you've got like gigs and gigs of RAM at your disposal, great. But I think this is something that doesn't come up very often, but when it does, you're immediately like, oh damn, like this is like a whole new world where I have to like be good at computers, basically. Whereas before, so often you're just like, yeah, we can like, I mean, because really, if a data set is like 100 megs.
Oh yeah, it doesn't matter how you like. It doesn't matter how you read it in. It doesn't like, as long as you're not running like all sorts of stuff on your computer at the same time, like that is probably going to work fine. Yeah, and it's funny too because like, so my partner is a motion animator, And so he has a very powerful desktop machine that normally if I have to work with like bigger data files, I just use his computer for that stuff because it is more powerful than my like little baby laptop. But because Russell and I were trying to do R and Node like in parallel, we wanted to use the same machine. So both of us were just like using our little MacBook laptops, and we were like, come on, you can do it, like don't explode. So it was fine, but it was definitely very a new challenge, because normally I would just be like, I'll just use the powerful machine and it'll be fine.
Do both of you have relatively new-ish laptops?
Yeah, I think they're newish, past couple of years.
Yeah. Okay.
They're not like brand new. I don't have the touch bar, but I purposely didn't get the touch. I got the one right before the touch bar became a thing on MacBooks.
I'm not even a fan of the touch bar.
That's why I got the one before it.
I have like a mixture of like envy and also like this kind of like weird pride that at this point my laptop is so worn that I've like worn down like my command key and some of like my things there. So it's like if anyone sees it, it's like, oh yeah. I'm like, yeah. But yeah, whatever. Like competently powerful computers, whatever.
It works.
Hipster computing.
Yes.
How old is yours, Jess?
I'm gonna say like 5 years. I've definitely had it fixed a few times when I probably should have had it replaced, but I don't know. It's okay. 2013. There we go. More than that. But it's a good boy. It will, they're Macs. They still last forever. But yeah.
I think my Air is just about that old. I tend to use a different one now, but I still love just how light and like portable. And then also the new keyboards kind of suck, to be honest. I'm not a fan of like the super loud, like really shallow keyboard on the new MacBooks. So I think once I end up getting an upgrade to my personal laptop, I will probably get a new Air rather than anything else. Even though, yeah, like they're terrible in terms of memory and like not for data science. If you want to do things
locally, say, those
but
are not intended for that kind of heavy usage, but you do you, man.
I love the idea of being like light and like having no. It's like, how like hikers on the like Appalachian Trail trade advice about like, oh yeah, don't get this toothbrush, like get this thing. It's actually like 17 grams lighter.
That's because you have to carry stuff for like thousands of miles. Are you carrying your laptop that far?
I mean, I have like a 40-minute commute. I don't always get a seat on the train either, so it's occasionally it's uncomfortable.
That's funny.
No, it makes no difference. Okay, cool. Well, I think we've managed to tackle the past few projects. Any final words of wisdom that you two want to impart on our audience?
Oh, that's such a big ask. Amber, you look so. I'm gonna give it to the pudding team. You guys are great with the words of advice.
Cool. I don't know. I guess if you're running into data errors, don't give up and just keep trying other stuff and you'll figure it out. And if you don't, ask people. Twitter people can be really helpful if you know who to ask. If you ask in the right way to get to the data people on Twitter. Helpful, yeah. But otherwise, yeah, any other questions about these stories and things, reach out to us. I'm sure we'd be happy to chat more.
That is a terrific summation. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you, or you will see us rather, on the next installment of one of these behind the scenes pudding process episodes. Thanks so much.
Thanks.